straight from the Mayor's mouth, with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello everyone and welcome to Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Hello there, Matt, how are you today?
Yeah, very good, thanks. Always good to be chatting to you. I had a bit of a cold over the last week, but I'm pretty much done and dusted with that now.
Good to see you, mate. Yes, you do look a little bit fresher this week.
Good, thank you.
You know, I was watching, or actually reading, should I say, the other day online. I got onto ABC Online. That sort of tends to be where I get most of my news from these days. Like a lot of people, you do your online sort of stuff. So I was on ABC News the other day. And a really interesting article came up, and I just want to share this with you and the listeners. It was to do with Alice Springs. Now, Alice Springs, as you and I both know, has had a pretty torrid time of things in the last 18 months to 2 years, and there's been a lot of youth crime and a lot of issues out there. And it's been constantly put out there in the media as a place that's had a lot of issues. Well, it's very interesting. The other day, they've come up and they've asked now for looking for about $50 million. $50 million to basically rebrand Alice Springs.
Wow.
To rebrand a centre of Australia, a place that we've all known and loved so well. Now at a point where they're saying because of so much negativity being pumped towards Alice Springs, they feel now they have to rebrand it. And they're asking now for $50 million in federal and I suggest probably territorial funding to rebrand it. Mm. The other interesting part that came through was from an expert who they interviewed and they spoke about. And he spoke about the fact there is a real danger in constantly putting down a place. You know, sort of always the negative news, sort of always throwing, whenever you sort of step out in front of the camera, is always the negative stuff. There's a real danger of that because people do start to turn around and start to go, well, wait a minute, I don't necessarily want to go there because of such negative news. One other interesting part, they talked about how much money they feel as though they've lost within the tourism trade over the last 2 years because of such negative news there. The other interesting part that came through in this article was the fact that you need to be able to always promote a place in a very positive way, but don't shy away from the negative. You know, you've got to sort of talk about the negativity, but don't make it your constant point of focus. You know, everybody's struggling from time to time with their crime and their issues, but don't make it your constant point of focus. If you are going to have to talk about crime, try to throw in there a bit of the positive spin in regards to it. So it could be that there could be a new crime initiative that's been brought into place. They're looking at addressing the issue. They're realising an issue, but actually trying to do something about it by bringing in some positive sort of, it might be a new crime department sort of being set up there or some new crime initiative set up by the territory government or the federal government or even the local town itself. So I thought that's an interesting one to sort of start with to share with because I know that over the course of time we've discussed some of the crime issues here in town and you've taken always a very positive sort of approach to this in the sense, and I thank you so much as a community member for doing that, because I think there's a real danger is if you come forward and constantly putting down a town in regards to crime and making that your main priority focus, you see now with Alice Springs the danger that happens if you constantly do that.
And it's interesting, and I'll have to read that article there, ABC website you talk about there. I'll have to go and have a look at that because it is interesting, and I know the Alice Springs Mayor has been on various national media outlets regularly and ones that I've appeared on as well, and I don't think I'm as popular a guest when I appear on some of those same outlets because I don't get in there and talk about fire and brimstone and the world is going to fall down. I talk about things in a reasonable, sensible approach and talk about, again, exactly as you say, all the positives in our community. Blind Freddie can probably see that if you get someone like the local mayor jumping up and down about a terrible crime wave or whatever hyperbole you might want to put on something, then people are going to say, oh, not going to Alice Springs because I've heard about how terrible it is up there, therefore we'll stay away. And we've seen some of those figures from a tourism perspective in Alice Springs. We've seen Moree has suffered the same way that tourism has suffered definitely in Moree because people have jumped up and down about crime, and whether they think they're doing the right thing or whether they like being in front of the media or whether they think the right thing is to jump up and down. But logic says if you want to do the right thing by your community, you're much better off speaking about your community positively, and you can achieve a lot more behind closed doors when you go and have some discussions, do some lobbying, all those things. You don't need to be loud and proud and on the front page to do all that sort of thing unless you're chasing votes, unless you're chasing populism. If you're doing that and you don't care about your local community, then sure, jump up and down, and people will say, oh, isn't that wonderful, not realising the long-term ramifications of all of that. So anyway, it sounds like an interesting story. I have to go and look at it.
And well worth a read, mate. Just something I thought I'd share with you to start off with in regards to, I suppose in many ways, reinforcing the approach that you've always taken with this. And I thank you again because of the fact that there's a real danger if you're just constantly out there sort of beating the wrong drum all the time.
Yeah. People want to hear about the good news stories, want to hear about what's happening positively, and you want to attract people. You want to attract people to your community for tourism, for their businesses. You don't want to be out there talking down your community. I'm a representative of this community. I need to be talking about all the wonderful things in our community,
Absolutely.
And they far outweigh any negatives.
Well, you know what? That's a great little jump in here, a segue here for our very first main point of topic, the new residents welcome night. So speaking of new residents and attracting new residents, this was great. So it sounds like you had a really good roll up there the other night to our new residents night. So how did it all go?
Probably 60 people, more than 60 people there that are new residents, definitely. And then we had our stall holders as well. It's a really good feeling because people are excited. They've moved to a new community. They're meeting new people. I love all the stall holders we get. And the idea of the stall holders is you might be a new resident and you might be interested in a sport or a service club or volunteering. So there are as many stall holders as we can almost fit into the place. This one was held at the theatre to basically say, be a part of our community. You've just moved here.
Yep.
What sports do you play? Or what groups do you want to get involved with? Do you want to go and start acting? There were people there or organisations there that have got acting facilities or outlets there. So what do you want to get involved with? Look at all these different things you could be involved with and see what you might want to be doing in our community. Because one of the things that's exciting there is if they get involved in things in our community, the likelihood of them moving again is much lower because, I'm involved in this and I play this sport and I do this activity. I don't want to leave this community.
Absolutely.
This is fantastic.
Well,
So
once you get that sense of engagement in place, it doesn't matter what sort of level it is, particularly though in a community situation, you do feel as though there's a sense of attachment you have, haven't you?
yeah, that's exactly right. And I do see people talking to each other, meeting each other, and I go and have a bit of a chat. And people meet each other. Sometimes they're from a similar country or background, or sometimes it's just, hi, I'm Jimmy. How long have you been here for? And they meet other new people. We do play a few little games and do a few little giveaways because I like to just find out a bit more about them. So normally I play a bit of a game to see how far away people have moved from. So I start off,
Who was our furthest this time around?
Well, a couple actually interesting, and it almost gets a bit of a map. You need to get out and get the tape measure out to see exactly how far they've moved from. Yes. But I start off more than 500 kilometres, more than 1,000. I know I'm always going to get to more than several thousand because I'm going to get someone from overseas. Yes. But it started to get to more than 5,000, more than 8,000.
Wow.
We're starting to narrow it down a bit now. So we certainly ended up, and you find out a bit more about people as you go. You do a few random things. For example, I'll say, tell me anyone that's come from a place that starts with S, and then someone from South Africa will come forward. Or it can be a town. I don't really care if it's from a town or a state or a country. Just different things like that. But so you learn a bit about it. So the person who we officially gave to that had moved the furthest was from the UK, and it's not a bad one because it's pretty much the opposite side of the world.
I was going to say, as soon as you start getting up around that 8,000-9,000 kilometres away, you're starting to push towards the UK area. That's right.
Europe, UK, that sort of thing. But certainly in chatting to people there, and normally I'll get them to come forward and they get a little prize, but they've got to pay for their supper, so I get them on the microphone to find out a bit more about them. So we talked to people on the mic that night that came from the UK and also Pakistan, South Africa, India, Nigeria, and then I did something where I wanted the smallest place I wanted to come from, and so Gilgandra. There was someone that had come from Gilgandra.
So we're dragging in the residents from Gil.
That's right. And that's the thing. You do typically find there are people from neighbouring LGAs, people from the other side of the world. So all of the above. But just chatting to them, why did you come here? What brought you here? What was the attraction?
Do you have a good story to tell us from someone there who sort of came here for a certain reason?
But almost to a person on this particular night, the standard response was, I came here for work.
Yeah.
Now, drill down a bit further than that. So, for example, there was one person there who wanted to, in South Africa, they wanted to get away from South Africa. They liked the idea of Australia in general. They found Aussies and South Africans have a lot in common in terms of just our culture, our sense of humour, just our sporting love, a whole range of things. But the danger, where they were living in South Africa, they just felt like it was always dangerous.
Yeah, right.
And this was a couple that had moved. But the final step was look for jobs in Australia, and she was a nurse, found nursing job. Took me a little while to get approved for that. So I probably spent a year getting to the point where I could finally move and use my skills. So she moved for her nursing job. Her husband moved. He's a robotics engineer.
Oh, right, okay.
But
yeah.
he's got a job in Dubbo. Not
I was going to say, don't we have too many opportunities for robotics engineers in Dubbo, do we? Or?
Not a lot, but he's got a job and he's quite happy with that at the moment, not using all his skills. But from that perspective, that couple in particular, they found one of the strange things was drinking tap water.
Oh,
They said where they were in South Africa, you couldn't drink the tap water. So you always drank bottled water. You had tap water in the house, but that was for showering in, that was for the toilet, that wasn't for drinking. You didn't even contemplate putting that in your mouth. And so always drinking bottled water. They came here and they were told you could drink the tap water. That was a bit nervous when they turned the tap on.
It's always the little things, isn't it? That's right.
It is, yeah. Can I really drink this? And they actually found that they thought the tap water had too much chlorine because they said we could smell chlorine in the water. And I'm not sure if it is chlorine you can smell, but it might be something you can smell in the water. But they said it just seemed like it was too strong. I said, well, to be fair, bottled water probably does have lower levels of chlorine because it's in a sealed container, whereas the water that we treat, we send it out to our water towers, our network of water towers. So we have to have enough chlorine to make sure nothing happens. There's things that are taken care of in terms of the ability to drink that water. So yeah, it probably does have more chlorine, but it was just a matter of getting used to that. They were only fairly new to Dubbo, so getting used to the fact that you could drink the tap water, that was pretty exciting for them. So a whole range of different backgrounds, and even talking to the stall holders at the end of the night. How did you go? And a few of the stall holders, we signed up a couple of new people. We've got some new people coming to play a sport. So again, it is just a really positive buzz there on the evening. Just a way for people to come along and say, well, from our perspective, I like to say welcome for a start, welcome officially to Dubbo, and thank you for choosing Dubbo out of all the places
That's
you've
right.
chosen. You've chosen good old Dubbo. So thank you for that for a start, but also really get involved, get engaged in the community, and I guarantee whatever effort you put in to engage, you'll get 10 times that back. It's a really good process.
So true.
Yeah, so a lovely night, and thank you to all those people that have come along.
Yeah, well, welcome to all our new residents. Now, we talked about this last week there, Matt. I knew it was going to come up this week. The National Simultaneous Storytime. You had the pleasure this week of going out to one of the schools in town to read the story of Bowerbird Blues. One of the little jobs you like to do as a mayor, isn't it?
That's
It's
right.
one of the good fun things.
It is good fun. So Bowerbird Blues by Aura Parker. It'd be pretty exciting actually to be chosen, your book chosen for National Simultaneous Storytime. There were approximately 2 million kids across the country.
I was going to say, too many kids in the audience listening to you read the story? Or?
Not quite to me, but across the country
That's
we're
unreal,
all
isn't it?
reading or having read to them Bowerbird Blues. So I don't know the process for that author to get chosen, but she actually appeared on
I'm sure
a
she's
video.
a very pleased author anyway, having 2 million people sitting back and listening to her story.
Exactly right. And so she appeared, there was a little video that they had there where she appeared on there as well and spoke about it. So she was pretty excited about it all. And she talked about her love of bowerbirds and just their, I suppose, fascination that she has with bowerbirds, which is why she wrote a kid's book about it. But what I love about doing those, and I go on to schools fairly regularly for different things, different programs they might have on, or they ask you to come along and do different things in schools, but typically we'll end up with a bit of Q&A. And so you sit down with the kids and the teachers, hey, any questions for the mayor? And lots of hands pop up. And this one, because we'd done a story on bowerbirds, this one, probably there were more kids telling me about bird stories rather than so many questions.
Sure.
More kids talking about their bird stories and a magpie they got attacked by, or some bird that lived outside their window, or just a whole range of
normal
stories.
little kindergarten child response sort of thing would be, I'd imagine.
That's exactly it. And even then, afterwards, they all want to come over and do high fives and chat to you. And, my dad does this. And, okay, who's your dad? And, oh, yes, I do know your dad. And so just
lovely?
Little stories like that. So it's interesting. And I can't give you any really outlandish questions they asked me this time. Sometimes they do ask some very interesting questions where the teachers go, you can't ask that. No, it's fine. Whatever they want to ask, that's fine. But it's just a nice experience to go along there and read out. And I think the whole concept of National Simultaneous Storytime is quite nice as well. Just having books as part of kids' lives, and I think teachers do a really good job anyway in making sure books are part of their lives, but just to have a focus for one event across the entire nation to say, let's do this. I wonder if they'd try and focus one day getting it to be larger than national simultaneous
Yeah,
storytime,
absolutely.
maybe international.
It'd be great to
simultaneous.
say, someone like a J.K. Rowling or something did a simultaneous thing around the world. It'd be wonderful, wouldn't
That'd
it?
be very cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it'd be very, very cool.
Anyway, so thank you to the school. I won't mention the school's name, but thank you to the school for having me along there. It's always good to have the schools involve me in different things that are happening there, and hopefully the kids appreciate it, and certainly the teachers seem to appreciate it as well.
I'm sure they did. Here's a little interesting little one here, Matt. Clontarf Foundation. Now, this is a group that's been established now for a while. They're a fantastic organisation. Do some terrific work with some of the young kids, not just obviously here within town, but throughout the Central West region across the board. Now, during the week, you had the absolute pleasure, I'm sure, again, to go along. They had a New South Wales Employment Forum. Now, this is an interesting one. I'll get you to tell us a bit about this Employment Forum. So, would they have groups set up here for these kids to go along to sort of to access as potential employment opportunities down the track, or what was it all about?
Yeah, spot on. And I've been to a few of these before, and there's one thing that struck me as being a little bit different about this one, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But you're right. The idea here is to look at what jobs they might get after they leave school. Now, typically these boys are in year 11 and year 12, so they're starting to think about what they want to do. Clontarf obviously is focused on boys. They make no apologies for that. They say our job is to take young Aboriginal boys and turn them into good men in our society, and they've got a much more complicated mission statement than what I've just said then. But that's my impression. They make no apologies. They say, we're going to focus on Aboriginal boys. We know there is certainly a level of disadvantage there, and let's see if we can solve that level of disadvantage. So I think they do a wonderful job around the nation. This particular employment forum was a Central West employment forum. So basically they had 9 different academies. So I think it was, say, Orange and Wellington, obviously Dubbo.
Okay.
And then they went out further west as well to Bree and to Burke and various.
So they all came in to Dubbo for this forum?
Exactly right. So it was at the RSL Club. And then around the edge of the room, this is upstairs in the RSL Club there.
Oh, yes, the auditorium there.
Yeah, so around the edge of the room you had various employers. So looking at what they might want to do, what training they might need. So there were training providers there were employers there.
Right.
And so as an example, you might look at some of the renewable energy providers, rail maintenance facility, just some different companies, Essential Energy, different companies that might be great for these boys to go and work with. And then you had training providers, their skill set or TAFE, where what skills do you need after school to be able to get a job with some of these. So they all work well together in terms of giving them ideas. And some of the boys there have got a pretty clear idea, I really want to work in this area, or I want to be an electrician or whatever. And other ones just go, I don't really know what I want to do, but I'm happy to talk about different potential occupations.
Helping establish their pathways and which way they want to go. Excellent. I love it.
Yeah, it is really good, and it's a good focus. But one thing I haven't noticed before, and maybe it's been there before and I haven't seen it, or maybe it's something a bit new, but I noticed some organisations that were more focused on the now rather than the future. So, for example, there was Woolworths and Officeworks and Bunnings.
Yep.
And I had a chat to those particular stallholders, and I didn't know whether they were there for their future employment or for the now employment. They said, we really love the idea that we can get some of these boys working in part-time jobs today. Rather than in the future, when you finish year 12, here's our career opportunity. Forget about that. What about today? What about this week? What about Saturday morning? What about Thursday night?
What a tremendous idea. Like it's literally sort of helping them with the now rather than sort of, the 2 years down the track. So to get them into a bit of employment now and get that experience up like so many kids do. It's fabulous.
Yeah, and I know with my kids, for example, they got to year 7 and we said, okay, you're old enough now to start doing a bit of part-time work somewhere in a retail environment, and just that whole idea of you work, you save a bit of money. The kids would come to me and say, Dad, can I buy this new thing, whatever it was? And I'd say, sure, you keep working for the next 3 months and you'll be able to save up and you'll be able to buy it.
Get
Can't you buy
appreciation
it for
for
me?
what that dollar stands for, absolutely.
That's right. Yeah. And sure, you can buy it for them, but you work for it, you'll appreciate that. You'll also appreciate the idea of budgeting.
Yes.
I can earn this much money and I want to buy that and that. Oh, I can't buy both. How can I decide? Well, you prioritise that, and or maybe you try and work some extra shifts, whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, for some of these boys, they just don't have that same sort of positive parental influence. And so something like this employment forum gives them that and gives them that ability to look at what jobs there might be there. So talking to the Woolworths, the Officeworks, the Bunnings, those sort of organisations, they are employing some of these boys now in a part-time scenario. At the end of year 12, they might see other potential opportunities within that organisation, or they might just have this idea that going to work, earning money, I want to do more of that now. What else can I do? How can I progress that? The last part that I thought was really good as well, and I've seen this happen before as well, is they do practice interviews.
Oh, yes.
Part of their rotation, so it was a bit like a speed date where you had your first store you'd go to and then there'd be a 7-minute timer and you'd move on to the next one.
Yep.
Part of the rotation was you sat down on the stage of the auditorium and they had people there to do an interview. So they'd actually do an interview as in a mock interview as if you were applying for a job. Because some of these boys have never sat down and gone through that process, never thought about that process. But you might be really good working in some particular organisation, but you've got to sell yourself.
I was going to say, so you've got to get there first.
You've got to get there first. So you've got to be able to go through, answer questions, and just think about the questions you might be asked. Just how do you answer a question? Tell me about yourself. Oh, gee, it's a pretty hard question to answer.
Yep.
And if you haven't got a lot of confidence or you haven't been brought up to talk about those sort of things, maybe you won't give a great answer, and then that employer says, well, not going to employ that person because their interview was terrible.
I can't see you doing it in front of a customer sort of thing. Exactly.
All that sort of thing, yeah. So well done to Clontarf. I do enjoy seeing what they do, and I do enjoy chatting to some of the boys as well. So
yes.
There was a little bit of parochialism with some of the boys here where they were keeping to their groups a little bit. You know, the Wellington boys were together and the Dubbo boys were together. And so there was a little bit of that. But again, I think they enjoy getting together and meeting each other and talking to each other, which they do from time to time, sometimes on the sporting field, but sometimes in a forum like this.
It's such a great initiative, isn't it? So well done to everyone involved. We've spoken at length, Matt, in regards to the CSU operation here in town, and it's great to see the fact that the council here is actually offering a scholarship, and it looks as though during the week that you managed to, one of the recipients there, a young girl by the name of Lily Erskine, who was an ex-student of mine, actually a fabulous young lady. She won the Dubbo Regional Council Scholarship, and you had the chance to catch up with Lil and present the scholarship to her. Yeah,
it was a ceremony there where there were a number of scholarships handed out, so that was fantastic. This scholarship goes back a long time. When I first got onto council, this scholarship was already in place. And what happened was a councillor, it might have even been Richard Mutton, but maybe it was just councillors in general, said we should have some sort of CSU scholarship. So all the councillors took $20 from their monthly wage. I think it was $20 a month, from their monthly amount they received as a councillor, and put that towards a scholarship. So that obviously combined that with all the councillors with $20 each, that actually fed into a scholarship for council.
What a wonderful idea.
Yeah, so it was a councillor-led scholarship. When the amalgamation occurred, then that stopped. So then the scholarship, it was nice for that to continue. So then council put in that money for the scholarship, so it changed from being councillor-led to being council-led. Yep. And I think it stayed that way ever since. So councillors don't contribute $20 a month anymore, but councillors still contribute.
That's where it started. It's a lovely story.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I'm sure Richard will correct me if it wasn't him, but it was led by councillors regardless whether it was led by Richard individually. So that seems like a nice process. So this is a $3,000 scholarship, a one-off. You don't get it every year. You get it as a one-off. Yep. People can apply for that scholarship again next year. But in the scholarship ceremony, a number of students were there receiving scholarships, and basically you've got to go through an application process and do that. But just talk to them about the general education process. That was probably the more important part. And just having CSU there as an educational option.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Someone like Lily, I don't know what she was proposing to do with her life when she finished year 12. She might have been thinking about going away to another place. She might have been thinking about staying here. But the fact that we've got the option to stay here and still gain higher education, I think that's a fantastic opportunity for so many people for a whole range of reasons. They might not want to go away. They may not be able to go away. They may not be able to afford to go away. Yep. But if they can get an education here, that's a great head start they've got if they want to go down that path.
It's enormous, Matt. You know, like my background through high school education, and to see an opportunity like this for kids, because not every child is ready to want to go away either, you know, like, and to have an opportunity like this, to have a university here in town where kids can, access a fine degree and to go off and to do it here in town and to have the opportunity still presented to them, which Dubbo presents, the part-time work, the living still at home with the family, still earning a bit of an income on the side, getting themselves a great degree in the process. At the end of the day, they'll finish with the same degree as anyone else from anywhere else. You know what I mean? Like whether you went to Charles Sturt University here, or when you go to Sydney University or New South Wales University, wherever you want to go, you'll still finish up with the same degree. And so when you go across and, to go to your potential employer down the track, you present them with, this is my degree. They're not going to ask where you went to, which university. It's irrelevant. You've got the degree. Happy days. Away you go. So it is so important that we have this here in town, CSU, and to see opportunities like this, the council supports, I think it's fabulous for the kids to want to do it. Because a lot of the kids that I've taught over the years, that they love the opportunity to still want to hang around. They're not quite ready to want to head off anywhere else. And not only that, they're just loving actually still being here in town. Like so many kids at Newcastle or Wollongong or Sydney have that opportunity. We have our opportunity here too, which is fabulous.
I think the other thing that's exciting is people from the west, from the region, have also got that opportunity to get educated here in Dubbo. Someone from a Burke, if you said to kids from Burke, you've got to go to Sydney to get your higher education, that's fairly daunting for someone that's grown up in Burke, whereas Dubbo is sometimes the big smoke for them. Yeah. Sydney's just one step too far away, and also more expensive, harder to get to, harder to still see mum and dad.
Absolutely.
Getting to Dubbo means that, well, I'll probably see mum and dad regularly, they're probably in Dubbo regularly, or I can get back out to home easily. Yeah. So you do find a few students that I typically meet that come from around the region, and sometimes even I'll meet students that have come from somewhere like a Sydney, where they've got the opportunity to be educated in Sydney, but they love the idea of trying out a regional area, seeing what it's all about, seeing what people rave about, living in regional areas. What can I do to look at that?
Absolutely.
So congratulations to Lily. That's right. She won the Dubbo Regional Council Scholarship, but also just congratulations to CSU for the wonderful work they do in another facility in our community.
That's exactly right. I was sitting down during the week, jumping into a bit of a T-bone or whatever it was, and watching the local news, and happened to sort of see the fact there was quite a crowd turned up to the council meeting during the week. Boy, oh boy, what a crowd indeed. As sort of they showed it through there. A lot of the discussion seemed to be, the crowd seemed to be there for talking about them voicing their opinion in regards to a potential sale of the sale yards here in town, but it's only a potential. There's only not even at that point of discussion yet. It's still from a community point of view of discussion and seeing what thoughts are. But I thought there was a massive crowd there at the council meeting. How did it all go? Was everyone well behaved, and has everyone sort of got their chance to have their say, and how did it all sort of pan out?
I actually do like a big crowd in council meetings, and before we had streaming, so I'm going back to the last term of council that I was involved with, the ability for streaming wasn't there. So if you wanted to participate or watch a council meeting, you had to come along physically and watch the council meeting. So we used to get reasonable sized crowds. I'm not talking about hundreds, but I'm talking about maybe 20 people would come along, mostly maybe 30 on a semi-regular basis. So it wasn't too bad. You felt like there were people there and you had some sort of interest in the community there. Once we've got streaming now, it's not unusual to have 2 or 3 people sitting in the audience, and that's about it, because people can sit at home and just watch it streaming, have their dinner while they're watching streaming, or whatever they might want to do while they're doing it. But sometimes when there's an issue that stirs people up a little bit, then you do get a crowd come along. So I would estimate we probably had 100 people in the audience.
Boy. When was the last time we'd had 100 people there?
Well, there was a process back in the old Dubbo City Council days called Save Our South. There was some potential, there was some potential for some change in zoning around South Dubbo, where you could do infill developments in a slightly different way, and that got a few people a bit concerned about that. And in the end, we had to hold one of the meetings over in the theatre because we knew we were going to get such a large crowd; they wouldn't all be able to fit in the actual chamber. So we held one. It might have even been a committee meeting and a council meeting, but we certainly held at least one meeting.
That'd been over 20 years ago now, wouldn't it?
Oh, not that long ago, but I'd say it'd be 10-ish years ago. So it was a while ago.
Yeah, so it's my dying cells in my brain, obviously. Aging process tends to sort of happen sometimes. But okay,
so that was Save Our South. That's the last time I remember such a big one. There was another time, and this would have been maybe around 2007 time frame, where we wanted to change the starting time of the sale yard. So the sale yards again.
Okay.
The starting time, and don't hold me to this, but I think we might have wanted to start it an hour earlier because we were finding that they were running out of time to get all the sales finished in a day. So we wanted to start it an hour earlier. and the agents didn't like that. They were going to have to pay more overtime for their staff or something like that. So we got stormed by the sale yards agents and producers on that particular occasion as well, where it was standing room only as well, in particular that the debate there. So we came along, 100 people there. We have public forum. Not everyone knows about this, but at the beginning, one of the first parts of every council meeting is a section called public forum. So it's 30 minutes that we set aside. Now, we don't have to use all of that. We use whatever amount of that we need. And people can come along and they've got 5 minutes, not 5 minutes and 10 seconds, not 5 minutes, 20 seconds. They've got 5 minutes maximum for them to put a view forward of whatever they want. Now, normally we would say it would make more sense if the views they put forward were related to council. Sometimes they're not. They just want to have a bit of a public spray about something. But normally it makes more sense when it's related to council, and it probably makes even more sense when it's related to something on the agenda for that particular evening. But it's a good opportunity for people to come forward. They've got all the councillors there in one room and they can have their say. It's not designed to be a Q&A or a debate. It's just, you've got 5 minutes. Put your views forward and then let the next person have their go.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but were the sale yards on the agenda for this council meeting?
No, they're not. They weren't on the agenda, and they're not on the agenda yet. We're still going through. The EOI is only just closed for the potential sale, potential lease, etc., and we've still got some more discussions to have before we finally get to the point of potentially making some sort of decision there. But again, democracy, people will have their say about it. And so, yes, I did actually talk to the crowd beforehand to say that I take the idea of behaviour in the chamber very seriously. I expect all councillors to be quiet when any other councillor is speaking. I expect there to be respectful behaviour. You might disagree vehemently with what someone else is saying, but you'll have your turn to say something and stay quiet in the meantime. And councillors are exceptionally well behaved. I would love state and federal pollies to watch a council meeting. I'm not just saying this council meeting. I think council meetings across the state, anytime I've been to another council meeting, it's the same thing where people are very respectful, very quiet, and people have their say.
Local council are very good at that. State and federal, not so much so.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so I said I expect the same level of behaviour of the crowd. And there is a section in our code of meeting practice that talks about an act of disorder, and then the chairperson of the meeting has the ability to eject anyone from the meeting if they have any acts of disorder. And I did explain that it's not to be clapping, cheering, yahooing, whatever, because if I was in that crowd and I thought it would be a good idea for the sale yards to be sold, it'd be pretty intimidating for that person to stand up if they know there's all these people that have cheered or jeered or whatever. So I did say I don't have a problem kicking people out. You do get your name recorded in the minutes as being ejected from the meeting if it does happen. And if you're going to be poorly behaved, then I won't hesitate to kick people out. But to their credit, very well behaved and stayed very quiet, and people had their 5 minutes. One person tried to go a bit over their 5 minutes, but told him very clearly that everyone had 5 minutes. It wasn't one rule for some people and a different rule for others. Everyone had that maximum 5 minutes. People put their views forward and councillors listened to those views, and when we finally get to the stage of making a decision, we'll be able to take those views into account. But I would encourage people to come along. I love it when there's a crowd there to come along and watch a council meeting.
Yeah, as well as sort of seeing democracy in action, isn't it?
Exactly.
Now, something that was on the agenda at the council meeting last Thursday night was a discussion surrounding the Wiradjuri Cultural Tourism Centre and the funding outcome. And, of course, and we discussed this at length last week and how exciting this is. Now, of course, it had to go to council for this to be officially, I suppose, resolved from the point of view of acceptance of the agreement that the federal government wants us to step into. So did we finally sign off on this?
Well, I'll leave people hanging on the answer to that one for just a moment.
You love doing this, don't you? You love to sort of give a little bit of context first.
Exactly right, a bit of context. So we did have Senator Deb O'Neill, who's the duty senator for Dubbo, and she came along during the week and we had a site meeting there to show Deb exactly where it will go. We obviously know the plans for this facility, so we took her up to Elizabeth Park. We had some markings on the ground to just show the scale of this facility, and it will be a fairly impressive
pretty huge, is it?
It is pretty big, yeah. So I thought that was important to do that. We had some councillors along there as well. We had some community members. So that was nice to have Deb go along there. Now, that meeting, Deb just happened to be in town before we've officially made...
I was going to say, was this before the official decision was made? Or
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So it was an announcement of the funding. In fact, I got a text from Mark Colton, our federal member for the seat of Park. So he sent me a text to give me the good news. That was the first I'd found out about it last week, that we actually received the funding. I actually went up there with Mark basically as soon as the announcement was made or as soon as it was public to have a look at there. And we had some photos up there with Mark, and then Deb was here this week. And so we had some photos with Deb. And so it then went to the council meeting. Now, you remember in December last year, or go back earlier, during last year, we had some debate about the different funding models and a whole range of different things with this facility and the potential for this. And then in December last year, we made the decision to say, yes, go ahead, put an application into the federal government, and our funding model will be, if we get the money from the federal government, we'll need to spend $2.2 million of council money, of community money, towards this $15 million facility, because we had some money from the state already and combine that. And so we had to basically resolve to go ahead and put the grant application in. We did that. That was a unanimous decision by council in December last year. Put the application in January this year, so our staff went and did that. And then obviously got to the point now, here we are in May, that it's been announced that, yes, you're successful. So logically, you would think that you would vote to go ahead with that, because you've already resolved that let's put the application in and let's go forward with that.
Was there some 90-10 sort of model that that came up as part of that discussion in regards to opposed to it?
There was certainly a discussion last year. There were two models the federal government was looking at. One of them was 50-50 funding, and that's a common thing that I see with grants. They expect you, the community, to put something towards something, that amount. A bit like when you say to your kids, if you can save up $50 for that, I'll put in the other $50. You put a bit of effort in and I'll put a bit of effort in as well. So often with grants, it'll be 50-50 funding. That's not an unusual thing to have happen. The federal government said 50-50 for growing regions grant money, but we've also got an option where you can do a 90-10. The federal government will put in 90%, you put in 10%, and there's a few rules around that. Now, I won't go into all the rules, but just in general terms, the way to access that funding was for it to be led by an Aboriginal organisation. So not council. Council wouldn't be the actual applicant for that. The leader or the applicant for that money would need to be an Aboriginal organisation.
Okay.
And they would need to provide the 10%, although we did have a discussion and we said, well, the state government money that we've received for this project now, we think if we could find an Aboriginal organisation to be the leader on this project, we could probably use the 10% from the state government, and that would be the 10% for that Aboriginal organisation to put in. We had a good discussion about that. We had some workshops and various discussions about that, and we saw a few problems with that. The first thing is not a lot of time on our hands.
Yep.
So finding one Aboriginal organisation, there are lots out there, finding the one that would be the one that would lead this project without having other Aboriginal organisations with their nose down a joint. Why didn't you pick us? What was the process you went through? Or more or less a consortium put together a number of Aboriginal organisations. And so again, there's a fair bit of work to do that. And then whatever Aboriginal organisation you ended up with, they would have to have the project management skills to manage a $15 million project. So we've got the plans. Here's the plans. You can take those over. But it's a fairly complicated process to manage a build project of a $15 million facility. So you had to do that. And then the timing to get all that happening in the right time and still be able to use that 10% from the state government. So with all of those complications, we didn't think it was feasible to try and go down the 90-10 path. And again, councillors voted unanimously to go ahead with the 50-50 funding, using $5.6 million we have from the state government, using $2.2 million from us, and let's build this $15 million facility. So that was where we went. That was the path we headed down. So some people have said, oh, you could have had this built for free, but we had that debate, we had that discussion, and we didn't think we could get it done in this round of funding. There's a second round of funding at some point in the near future. We don't know when that will open. We don't know when that will close.
Plus, there's a big risk that you would, if you chose to sort of go to the second round of funding, which would mean you would dismiss the current money on the table offer and say, no, we'll just wait to come back in the second round. Like the federal government, I can understand why they would probably turn around and go, you didn't want the money first time round. Why would we trust you to want the money the second time round?
And you've pulled out of a process that you've already started.
Absolutely,
so I think a bit of reputational damage there.
Yeah.
Because if you're a government and you're giving money to an organisation, you want to make sure it's used. You want to see some outcomes. You don't want to have it sitting in a bank account somewhere. You want to actually get outcomes for the community.
Why go through the process if you're not going to sort of pull it all the way through?
Yeah, so all of that. So there was a discussion, but councillors unanimously decided we should go with the 50-50 and do the funding down that particular process. So that was a bit of a precursor, if you like, to all of this. And,
context again, there it is.
And I think if we look at, I'm going to pull out a few different grants, if you like, in the past where we received different monies from state and federal government to give you an idea that it seems fair and reasonable most of the time that you contribute in some way, shape or form. So I'm going to pull out a few from our history. If I go back to Barden Park, one of my favourite grants we've received, $5.7 million Barden Park was to build. That was back in November 2014 we officially opened that. We got $3.5 million from the federal government, 1.3 from the state government, and we put in less than $1 million. So not a bad scenario. Now, we had two cracks at that. The first time we put in a grant application for that for the federal government, we got rejected. No, sorry, you didn't make it. And Murray Wood was a director at the time. I was mayor at the time. We went over to Canberra, flew to Canberra and sat down with the department and said, we thought we had a really good proposal here. Why did we miss out? And they said quite simply, you're relying on the federal government for too much of the money. You need to get more of a contribution from the state and you need to put in more of a contribution and you might have a better chance. So the second time around we did do exactly as they suggested, got more from the state, got more from us, and we were successful second time around. So that's not a bad scenario, if you like, the equation there. In 2019, so I wasn't involved with this one at all, but there was a ribbon cut on a $17.6 million upgrade of the airport, and that was $6.7 million from the feds, $7.5 from the state, and $3.4 million from council. So all three levels of government, that seems like a pretty reasonable thing to do. In 2016, the sale yards had a $6.6 million upgrade, 3.3 from the feds, 3.3 from from us. So we contributed 50% of that particular one. And the other one I thought was a good one was Apex Oval. November 2012, we had the new playing surface at Apex Oval ready to go. We had a 10 megalitre underground stormwater tank that we built as part of that process. We got $4.5 from the feds, and that project was about a $12 million project, so we put in the rest of the money for that one. So you see there that typically you're putting in something from a local perspective, and that seems like a fair and reasonable outcome to get some of these.
You can understand why, from a federal government perspective, why they ask that of the local government groups, because you've got to remember the fact that they're just not for us. They're for everybody. And they still have to justify their spending. And so therefore, we're just one of many council groups that are asking for money on a regular basis. So the expectation, I would have to think, would be the fact that, you should be contributing. You're still getting your income coming through. There's still money source for you to sort of revenue there that you could be allocating to these sort of projects. So I can understand why they turn around and say that.
And keep in mind that, and I don't know the exact number, but there were more than 200 applications received for round one of the Growing Regions program.
There you go. Yeah.
40 of those projects were successful. So our project was one of 40.
Yeah.
There's 150 electorates across the nation, and I don't know whether every electorate had an application go in, but as I say, over 200 applications went in. So it's a competitive process.
Well, only a fifth of them got a grant.
Of all the ones that were put in the first place, that's right.
And ours was significant.
Well, it was a significant sum of money. So if I just look at a couple others very briefly, just to give you that full context, the other ones where we didn't manage to get any money, our theatre. So our theatre opened in July 2010, $16 million or thereabouts was the cost of the theatre, and we received $0, nothing from state or federal. And I wasn't mayor at the time, but I know I was on council, and we certainly pushed very hard. The way we paid for that was a 5% rate rise over 2 years to actually pay for the theatre. And that was something we had to have that discussion with the community about doing that rate rise. The other one was the Western Plains Cultural Centre. We opened that officially in February 2007. $8.2 million we spent on that, $0 from state or federal government. So we certainly have had things we've paid for all ourselves. And I don't know anyone in our community, or very few people in our community, that would argue that we shouldn't have the theatre and we shouldn't have the cultural centre.
Absolutely.
And they're things that we got nothing from state or federal. So that's interesting. Now, if I talk about this project, I just want to give a bit of a quick history on this. February 2019, council submitted an application to the state government. This is just after the amalgamation, so there's a bit of money around from the state government for $10.1 million. They put an application in, the council put an application in with the state government, and they secured $10.1 million. And $2.5 million from council, and that was for 3 projects. The 3 projects were the Macquarie Foreshore Events Precinct, so that's the shared pathway and events precinct there.
Yep. Which, by the way, looks fabulous. I walked it last week and it's superb.
There you go. And that's stage one. We've still got the event part of that, but certainly the shared pathway is done. We've got the old Dubbo Jail Heritage Plaza and the Wiradjuri Cultural Tourism Centre. So there were 3 projects there, and council estimated about $12.6 million, of which $10.1 million they got from the state government. So that's fantastic. But it became obvious when we got onto council, that's beginning of 2019, February 2019, when we got onto council.
Wasn't going to be enough.
Nowhere near enough.
Yeah.
And all 3 projects were at jeopardy at some point. We've had to do some juggling around to fund, have some discussions with the state government to say, well, it's not enough for us. We need some more. Now, we managed to get another $5 million from Create New South Wales for the Wiradjuri Cultural Tourism Centre. So the $4.2 million that was tagged for the Wiradjuri Cultural Tourism Centre was now to $9.2 million. Still, we thought that might be enough. And again, there was a bit of juggling around because we really wanted to make sure we completed some projects. And I know councils were very keen to see the Wiradjuri Centre built, but also we didn't want to leave 3 projects hanging. So we had some discussion with the state government. We got permission to shuffle around some of those funds. In the end, we said, great, we've got the funds to finish the old Dubbo Jail Heritage Plaza. We've got the funds to finish the shared pathway and the foreshore events precinct. Let's get those 2 done, which we're flat out in the process of doing those 2 now.
Yep.
And then Wiradjuri Cultural Tourism Centre, let's put in the Growing Regions program for the federal money. If we get that, then we think we can complete that as well. So that was the kind of background, if you like, because we worked out you needed about $15 million, not the $4.2 million that was initially estimated for that. So with the 7.2 announced, 7.190505 to be exact, but let's call it 7.2.
Very specific of you, but yes. We'll call it 7.2.
7.2.
Yep.
And the $5.6 million from the state government, then we would need $2.2 million to complete the $15 million project. And there's still some really tight timelines here because that state government money has got deadlines on it. We've got to make sure we spend that money before the deadlines, and they want to see, again, something come out of that. Most deeds you go into for a grant, you have some form of completion deadline because obviously the state government or federal government doesn't want to see it hanging around there for a long period of time. So it is actually a challenge with budgeting, with council, with all the different grant money. And to give you an idea of some variability, in the 2019-2020 financial year, Dubbo Regional Council received $34.8 million in grants. Compare that to last financial year, the 2022-2023 financial year, we received $57.8 million in grants.
Okay.
So a fair bit of difference there, and that makes it hard for us as councillors budgeting going forward, not knowing how much you're going to receive in grants because you put these in competitive processes and you think you're going to get a few of them, but how many you get, you're never quite sure. And there's no doubt about it in my mind, the reputation of Dubbo Regional Council was poorer back in that 2019-2020 financial year, and that probably was a result of that $34.8 million because, again, maybe money wasn't flowing through because there wasn't confidence that projects were being completed on time, on budget, and so maybe it was a bit harder to get grants, but it does vary a lot in terms of those grants. So that was a bit of the background, if you like, to all of that and where we ended up with and why we made certain decisions. The other one that I saw in the community, a bit of discussion around, which I thought was interesting, was this discussion about it's not really $2.2 million. It's really more like $3 million because when you spend $2.2 million, you then take that money out of the bank and you're not getting interest on that money going forward. So it ends up being more, which I would suggest is a completely flawed argument.
It's an interesting argument. What I'd like to know is the fact that if you've got $2.2 million, you're looking for a return up to $3 million in a couple of years. Can I have that bank that you put that money into?
Well,
I like those interest rates. That's pretty impressive.
And how long do you go into the future? So the example I would think of is if I'm going to go and buy a new TV tomorrow and I find a TV that I want for $1,000 and I say to my wife, I'm going to go and spend $1,000 on a TV. And my wife says, well, no, that's going to cost you $2,000. No, I've seen it advertised. Look, here's the catalogue, $999.99. It's $1,000 for that TV. And my wife then says, well, if we put that money in the bank where it is now and leave it there for 20 years and we get 5% interest on that, we'll generate, say, another $1,000. So it's $2,000 is the real cost of that TV. And I think that my wife might have been smoking something last night because I'd say, well, I don't really understand the logic of that.
No,
You're spending $1,000.
That's right.
And that's it. So in this particular scenario, we're not spending $3 million. We're not spending $2.8 million. We're spending $2.2 million on this project.
Yep. Because you're spending it now. You're not spending it in the future. You know what I mean? In the future, that $2.2 million, well, you might need $4 million.
Exactly right. And this is the point. We know that building prices are going up. In the end, councillors looked at all this and also the opportunity cost. What opportunity is there if not so much the 2.2 million that you sit in the bank and get some interest on, but the opportunity once this is built for Aboriginal tourism, Aboriginal culture, but the really big picture thing is our economy, our tourism economy.
It's huge.
Because when people come to regional locations, they want and sometimes almost expect to find some Aboriginal tourism. And at the moment, there really isn't much to offer in regional locations in general. Yeah. So having this facility, which again will allow Aboriginal people to sell some of their products, to provide some of their services, but also just to be able to boost the economy, the sooner we get this built, the better. So I'm quite comfortable with us spending $2.2 million on a $15 million facility.
Well, look, another way of putting it is if someone turned around and said to you, listen, there's a home there for $1 million, I'll give you $800,000 towards that home. You've only got to put in $200,000.
Pretty good scenario, isn't it?
That's not bad, is it?
Yeah. So it's less than 15% we'll spend
Yeah.
on this particular facility. So in the end, there was a fair bit of debate at council about all of those things that I've just talked about.
Yeah.
But in the end, council voted to go ahead with this and basically sign the deed and get cracking as soon as possible. We've got the plans already. We've got to go through, we've got to put a DA in the council and get that approved.
Excellent. So it's been officially signed off by council. Now we're all steam ahead. So
full steam ahead, and it does need to be full steam ahead because of some of the deadlines.
It's got to get done
we've
pretty
got.
quickly too, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that was very exciting at council to basically finally go, yes, this is actually happening.
That's brilliant. Council and mayoral fees was something that got discussed at the council meeting on Thursday night. This amazes me, to be honest, how much this creates a sense of angst and anger with some people in the community. I don't know sometimes if people actually think the fact that a councillor is actually just there doing this as a volunteer gig. If you're one of those people who thinks that the councillors should be up there just volunteering to be a councillor, well, honestly, you put your hand up and you go and have a crack at it and see how long you last as a volunteer to do the jobs that our councillors have to do and the expectations that our councillors have to do and be at and be part of every single week. So therefore, there is an income that should be given to all councillors and to people like yourself too, Matt, as the mayor. The expectations of the mayor is more than the council, and therefore that should be reciprocated then from the point of view of what you should be getting paid. I notice here the fact that 3.7% increase is what was voted on there during the week, which, again, I'll put it out there, I think that's very reasonable, based upon what normal inflationary rates have been in regards to the last 12 months, and also what I'd suggest too that most of us would have received as part of our normal increases through CPI over the course of the last 12 months. So the decision's been made, 3.75%. As I said, I'm sitting here saying that's fine, no problem for me. I think it's more than reasonable. How did the discussion go in regards to it leading up to that? Was there any objection to a 3.75% increase, and even also, how did you get to this figure?
Probably more an objection to the process.
Right, okay.
The Local Government Remuneration Tribunal makes recommendations depending on the size of the council as to the minimum and maximum you pay councillors and mayors across the 128 councils across the state. And we put a submission in. There were a number of submissions that were put into the Local Government Remuneration Tribunal. And our submission said, don't give the decision to councillors. We've got so much legislation around conflicts of interest, about declaring a conflict of interest, about declaring a pecuniary interest. It's very strict and very tightly controlled around all these things. If there's something where you're doing something in your street that might vaguely have an impact on you, you better declare that and make sure you declare that. And councillors do get in trouble if they haven't declared something. Sometimes I look at them and go, wow, that was a pretty obscure thing. Here's something where we're voting how much we are paid, and that's okay. So there's no conflict of interest apparently there.
That seems a bit strange, doesn't it, really?
It does. So this is a compulsory part of the process every year. The Local Government Remuneration Tribunal sets the minimum maximum, and then every council across the state has got to vote on what you'll pay ourselves as a range from that minimum. There is a minimum. You can't go below that minimum.
Right.
There's a minimum and a maximum you've got to go to.
So they'll give you a bit of a range that you can work in, but then it's up to you guys to decide how much that should be. Is
That's
that
right.
Okay.
And normally, councils I've been involved with in the past, because it's not a lot of money, typically go for the maximum. And again, this year, the minimum maximum fees went up by 3.75%, as you said. But to give people an idea, the fee for a councillor, the maximum amount you can pay a councillor on a council the size of Dubbo is $27,050. Now, keep in mind, Dubbo Regional Council has got approximately a $3 billion asset base.
Yep.
Our budget for next financial year is approximately $180 million. You've got 10 people ultimately charged with the responsibility of making decisions for that organisation.
Well, there's a governance and due diligence which you have to follow as part of that too.
Exactly right. You've got more than 500 staff that are employed, which ultimately we're responsible for the employment of one staff member, being the CEO, but that staff member then is ultimately responsible for those 500. So we are still ultimately responsible for that entire organisation. So you've got a fairly large, or not fairly large, a very large organisation. And there's a lot of pressure. So we had 100 people come along to the council meeting saying, we want you to do certain things with the sale yards. You're running an airport. You're running water treatment. It's very important that we treat water to the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines because people's health relies on it. We could have a process that's a poor process and suddenly the health of every person in our community is impacted. We've got a sewage treatment plant. We've got multiple water treatment plants and sewage treatment plants we're responsible for. We've got a childcare centre, we've got a caravan park, we've got the sale yard. So we've got a range of different business assets. We've got tourism facilities like the Old Dubbo Jail, a heritage site and tourism centre. There's a lot that council's responsible for. And for all this, you're given the
grand
unfair
total
reward.
$27,500.
No, $27,050.
And $50. Not the 500. Take that $450 off. There it is.
Yeah.
You know, and I can sit here too, Matt, coming from a family which has had, councillors in it. My mother was a councillor. She served term on council for years. And I remember very, very well. And she wasn't receiving $27,000, I can tell you now. That was quite a few years ago. And it was over 20 years ago now. And I remember, though, as a child, her sitting there for hours at night time reading through the papers. It would take her like just forever and a day. There'd always be bundles of papers sitting on the kitchen table there, and she'd be sitting there at night just simply reading through them, or just so she could be stay on top of what was actually happening around the place. And she would chair a few committees, and she'd be out most nights having to sort of go out to committee meetings and it was enormous, the amount of expectation. She had a normal job she had to sort of obviously run as well throughout the course of the days. This was all outside of that time frame. Her weekends, quite often, she'd be out and about having to go to different functions and events and things like that to have to be there. And again, it wasn't much more than above a voluntary job. Now, I suggest too, $27,000 today it's slightly above voluntary, to be honest. $500 a week. I know it sounds like a lot of money for a lot of people, but for what you have to do, I'm telling you, it's moving towards a voluntary sort of basis type figure. So if anyone's out there thinking the $27,000 is a lot of money, well, it's not for the amount of work that is expected of a councillor on a weekly basis. And
the unfair thing here is that we had to put our hands up to vote to say, yes, pay us a 3.75% wage increase. It's not often you'd go into a workplace and say, oh, okay, everyone here, we're going to see whether you want to vote to increase your wage. Well, I think most people in a workplace would vote to increase their wage, but are you going to frown upon someone who votes to increase it, or I'll vote against that because I think we're paying ourselves too much? Well, again, 27,050 doesn't sound like it's too much. I'll give you some comparisons around some other councils just to give you an idea of different councils. And different councils, I don't think, and part of the submission, I've seen submissions that have said this same thing before, that councils should be paid the same across the state because your responsibility levels are pretty much the same, and sometimes more so in smaller councils. The fact that the dollars are different doesn't really change the fact that you've got a huge amount of responsibilities, but typically they judge it based on the budget of some of these councils. So to give you an idea, Sydney City Council, if you're a councillor down there, you get paid 45,070.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So again, they've got a bigger budget, but City Council doesn't manage water,
No.
Doesn't manage sewage.
No.
They don't manage an airport.
Pretty sure they don't have sale yards out there either.
They don't have sale yards down there, no, pretty sure. No childcare, no caravan park.
Yeah.
They don't have 7,536 square kilometres to manage either.
Yeah. Well, they get about 50 million a year each year too from their parking.
From their parking, they get a lot of good income from that.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I would suggest that a councillor at City Council had more responsibility, and I'd probably say they have less than someone in somewhere like a Dubbo.
Oh, absolutely.
Parramatta, if you're a councillor out there, 37,960. Newcastle, Wollongong, 35,620. And then at the other end, places like Burke, Bree, Cobar, Narromine, Walgett, Warren, some of those places, 13,520.
That seems unfair, doesn't it?
It does.
It just seems so unfair.
And again, those places have all those things, not necessarily all those things, but things like water and sewer. The other thing is that in just about all of the councils west of Dubbo, the number one employer would be the local council. So as a councillor there, your responsibility level is even more important in the local economy, but you are a go-to organisation, and councillors on those are go-to people for so many community activities. 13,520 doesn't seem like a fair amount. So councillors in the end voted, yes, let's go ahead with a 3.75% wage increase. Many councillors felt uncomfortable voting for their own wage increase, but that seemed like a fair and reasonable thing to do. And it applies to the next financial year. You've got an election next year. You don't want someone to say, I can't afford to be a councillor. You'd love to be able to have everyone there.
Yep.
And at that amount, there are some people who simply couldn't afford to be a councillor because they've got their normal job they're trying to do and they couldn't juggle it all. You also have an additional amount as the mayor. So again, we voted on this as well. For Dubbo, the amount was 66,800 for the mayor. Again, if I give you some comparisons across the state, if you're the mayor of Sydney City Council, you get an additional $247,390.
Well, that is a full-time gig.
That does seem to be a full-time gig. That's exactly right. Yeah. Parramatta Mayor, $122,640. Newcastle Wollongong Mayor, $110,970.
So they're all nearly double what you would be getting and allocated at that sort of space.
Correct. And then let's go to those smaller communities again. 29,500 for the mayor of Burke, Bree, Cobar, etc. So what I think seems a bit wrong there is if I'm a councillor at Sydney City Council with the reduced levels of responsibility compared to the mayor of Burke, as a councillor, I get paid more than the mayor of a Burke or the mayor of a Walgett. And again, how
doesn't
important,
seem right.
Yeah, how important are those people out there in those communities for that overall community?
Hey, quick question for you in regards to it. I don't know if this is an old wives' tale or if it's actually true, but Queensland. Is there a situation in Queensland where if you're a councillor in Queensland that you're getting, it is literally a full-time gig for a councillor and they're getting a full-time wage?
I can't remember when it happened, but it was a number of years ago. They changed some things in Queensland government, Queensland local government, where they did say, they did some amalgamations and they did say, we think as a councillor you should be more a full-time job. It should be your basic job. Yep. So if you go to places like the Sunshine Coast, Moreton Bay, Townsville, those sort of places, as a councillor, you would get about $153,000.
Oh, okay. So it's not an old wives' tale. Actually, that's what happens.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Now, the view is that if you pay that sort of money, you can expect someone to do it as their full-time job. It's paid enough definitely to do it as a full-time job.
Absolutely, yeah, that is definitely a full-time wage.
And you're probably going to get a bigger talent pool to draw from, and you're probably going to get people who spend their day. They have offices in the council building where they walk in and they sit down.
Okay.
You can walk into many of these councils and say, could I see a councillor? Because there's a group of councillors sitting around together, working away on different ideas, having community meetings, really being more involved because they've got the time to do it.
Well, as you say, if you want the best people to be representatives of that situation, well, you've got to attract them in the right way. And I quite like the idea. I think it's fabulous. That's actually a full-time job to be a councillor in space.
Yeah, that's right. And it's definitely paid as a full-time job. Yeah. It's a good amount of money to be paid, so you get good talent there.
You think come the election time, you're going to get some pretty high-quality candidates.
I thought to put things in context, it's probably worthwhile also looking at, say, state and federal MPs and what they might get paid. And I think the local members across the state, so we're talking about state government MPs here, the local members across the state and local MLC, so people that are in the Legislative Council, I think their base wage is about $172,000.
Right, okay.
And so that's their base salary with some basic allowances, if you like. In addition to that, if they're a minister or they're on a committee or they might be a leader of their party, whatever, there are extra amounts paid over and above that. So if you're leader of the opposition as a local member or deputy leader of the opposition, you might pick up, say, $230,000. Once you start to get to be ministers and that type of thing, you start to go up from there as well.
Yep.
But keep in mind, you also get staff, you also get
Yep.
an electoral allowance to spend money on different things in the electorate. So it might be advertising, for example. So you're getting that 172 plus on top of that. And for the federal member, again, 150 federal members,
Yep.
you're probably standing on about a base wage of $212,000.
Okay.
And then again, allowances on top of that might increase that. And
Well,
then
they're significant wages, aren't they?
they are, that's right.
Yeah.
And then as a councillor, 27,050.
Yeah, again, context, we took that word a few times today, but it's true. It puts into context the nature of the role of a councillor here.
Yeah, that's right. And well done to councillors across the state for the job that they all
Absolutely,
do
yeah.
for not a lot of pay. And again, I don't know anyone, I've never met anyone that says, gee, I really want to do this because I needed the money. People that I know are passionate about the community, passionate about the job they do, and they also get a little bit of money for it, not a huge amount, for the time and effort, and never forget the responsibility. And even my kids joke with me, they've joked with me for 20 years that I'm just going to duck up and grab some milk, and they say, sure thing, see you in half an hour. What do you mean? I'm just going to duck in and get some milk? Yeah, I know, but I know when you go in there, there'll be someone who'll say, oh, I've been meaning to ask you about, and you'll have a 15-minute
About that
conversation.
pothole out the front of my house.
About the pothole, that's right.
Now, Matt, looks like there's been some discussion there in regards to the council meeting, that an idea has been presented that DAs potentially could be brought forward and discussed and made decisions on at committee meetings as opposed to council meetings. Interesting discussion. How did it all go?
So there's a couple of things here. Many people think that they've got a DA in with council and therefore it'll come to a council meeting. Some people sometimes ask me about a DA they've got lodged and when are we going to make a decision on that? Most DAs don't come to council. There are some certain triggers in terms of why a DA would come to council. You can have a certain number of people that request it, a certain number of councillors, a certain dollar value. There are certain specific reasons why, but for most, the DA is processed by our staff. It ticks the boxes it needs to tick and it gets processed accordingly. To give you an idea, in the last year, there have been approximately 650 DAs that have been processed by council,
Right.
which is good number.
Yeah. How many got to the council meeting?
Yeah, of those, 7 came to council.
Okay. So not a large number at all.
Not a large number at all.
Yeah.
So one of the issues here was that we've talked about it before. Committee meetings don't make decisions of council. They make recommendations to council. And the great part about that system is that you get 2 bites at the cherry. So you get to have a discussion at a committee meeting. It's a more casual discussion. You've got a bit more flexibility in the rules of debate at a committee meeting.
Yep.
And then at the end of all that, there's a decision made by the committee, but that decision is not a binding council resolution. It's a recommendation to the council. The only exception to that is with a tender. And that's okay with a tender because tenders, you're not allowed to lobby councillors around a tender. You can't say, I've put my tender in, I've put $1 million in for that particular bit of road infrastructure. Can you please give it to me? And that would be inappropriate to even have that conversation. So it's not something with a tender where you do get lobbied, have discussion in the community. It's very much a confidential process where you put in the tender, no one else sees your tender price. We get it to a council meeting in a confidential session where we look at those prices and then make a final decision. So that's the only binding decision, if you like, of a committee meeting. Everything else gets referred through to a council meeting. Now, I am a big fan of that process. That's the way it works in our council. So I'm officially speaking about what our process is, but on a personal level, I think that's much better. And I've seen councils that have given full delegated authority to committee meetings, and it confuses the public because there's a committee meeting on, and that committee meeting made a decision. When's it going to council? No, it's already been done. But it was only a committee meeting. Yeah, well, why did you take that one to a committee meeting and then one next week to a council meeting? Then some councils just say, well, forget about any committee meetings. We'll just do all council meetings. But it almost reduces the significance of a council meeting because you're almost like every 2 weeks there's another council meeting on. So what's the significance of those? And do you really need that many? You want council meetings to have a little bit of gravitas, a bit of importance about them. So
Plus, I also suggest if you've only got 7 coming through to the council meetings, there's probably a reason why they probably come through for that a major point of discussion as well.
Well, spot on there. You might want to have a bit of discussion. So the staff said to be able to process DAs quicker, we'd like to have the ability to be able to have a delegation where a committee meeting could make a decision on a DA and a council meeting. And one of my concerns was, is this really holding up the process? How many are brought forward? Well, 7. Okay, so it didn't really hold up the process for approving DAs. Is there some other reason? Well, you've got a process called a deemed refusal after 40 days, might be 42 days, I think it's 40 days. There's a deemed refusal process. Well, does that help in that process? Yeah, it could possibly, but again, 7 DAs that have come to council. So there was a bit of discussion back and forth. In the end, councillors said, no, we should leave it the way it is. Make sure that a council resolution is required at a council meeting for a DA and for everything else we do as well. So that seems like probably a more open, transparent way as well. People hear about something in the committee. Oh, I heard there was some discussion last week about that. Yep. If you want to have a say on it, go and talk to a councillor, because in 2 weeks' time, they're making the final decision on that rather than, whoops, the decision's already been made, end of story. So that was a fair bit of discussion around that. And there's some people who disagreed around that process. But
is
in
there
the
a
end,
reason why a certain DA would come forward to council for a discussion?
Yeah, there's a number of specific triggers there. So it is related to a number of petitioners. So basically, if you get a certain number of people from the community who come forward and say, I'd like this DA to be seen by council, if you get a certain number of councillors who request that, if you get a certain dollar value over a certain dollar value. So there's about 8 different triggers in total, but they're the main reasons it would come to council. And again, it can automatically go to council if it's over a dollar value, for example, or if councillors have a few people from the community asking about it, councillors can say, this particular one here, can we formally request this come to council? So they're some of the reasons you do that. But in general, again, most are processed at the staff level, and whichever way they might be. One that we have got in there, which I'm a big fan of as well, is that any DA that's going to be rejected or it's recommended for refusal by our staff, the staff do not have the delegation to refuse it. Even if it's a small DA, if it's a DA that hasn't been requested by councillors, but the staff are going to say, no, we recommend this DA is refused. It doesn't meet the criteria. It doesn't match what it needs to do, whatever. They don't have the power to do that. Now, there's a very
specific... Does that then go to council?
It has to go to council for refusal.
Right.
Now, there's a very specific reason that I like that process, and it might sound like I'm being harsh on our staff with this one, but it's about the process, and I'm a big fan of the process. If I'm a corrupt staff member, I'm not suggesting we have any corrupt staff members, but there have been examples across the state.
You're focusing on the process and making sure that there's never an opportunity for that.
That's right. If I'm a corrupt staff member and I'm responsible for a small DA, not of any great significance, and the person putting it in, it might just be for an extension of their house, a garage. It mightn't be a big, bad, scary developer. It might just be a mum and dad developer. And I say, well, I'm going to make the decision on this. It's only a small DA. I'm the single individual that has the responsibility to make the decision on this. And, I think I'm going to refuse this DA. But look, if you could buy me a new power drill, or if you could slip me a carton of beers or $100 or whatever it might be, I reckon I could approve this.
Well, sadly, history has told us that those sort of things have happened in the past. Not at Dubbo here, but in other regions, we see them occasionally sort of come across the news and those sort of moments. That's
right. Now, so by having the staff with the power to refuse a DA, there's potential in the process for that sort of corruption to occur. And as you said, it's happened. It hasn't been something we've ever seen here in Dubbo, and I'm not suggesting any of our staff would do that, but sometimes if you create a process that allows corruption, sometimes corruption occurs. By saying that you must send it to council for a refusal, well, a staff member could say to this developer, look, I'm going to recommend this for refusal, and the developer says, well, who makes the decision? Well, it goes to council, but if you pay me $100, I won't recommend it for refusal, and that person says, well, you know what, I'm happy for it to go to council, because then you're going to need a majority of councillors to essentially be as corrupt as you are, and it's much less likely in a group of 10 that you're going to get a majority of those that are going to be bought off in some way. So again, it just puts a better check and balance there in place.
Protects the integrity.
I think absolutely right. So you don't want lots of DAs coming to council, but you do want DAs coming to council when there's a specific reason or need for those to go to council. So we're going to stick with the way it is.
Okay.
The process is it'll only a DA, it needs to go to be resolved by council, needs to be resolved at a council meeting, not a committee meeting.
Very cool. Right, Squadron Energy. There are one of the groups in town that have been involved with our renewable energy zone and what they're sort of working on around there. Now, this is the group, I think, Twiggy Foresters Squadron. I think that's Twiggy's little group. Now, it looks like here that council sort of moved into proposed agreement to lease some council-owned operational land here. Is this in regards to potentially setting up with Squadron the whole idea of some housing that they're going to build? Is that right? Is the whole idea of this operation?
So I'd say worker accommodation.
Worker accommodation. Probably a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you've got to have with any proponents that are putting in projects, renewable energy projects, the state government's getting a bit stricter in saying you can't just say you'll find some employees and you can't just say you'll find somewhere for them to live. You've got to demonstrate as part of the planning proposal, as part of your DA, if you like, you've got to demonstrate where these people are going to live. You've got to demonstrate how you're going to source these people. You've got to show more detail in it, because what's happening is you get the cumulative impact. So one proponent says, we'll find some employees and we'll put them up somewhere. That's fine for one project. With 37 projects, they all say, we'll find somewhere for them to live. Hold on. You can only all stay in that one motel once. You can't all have 50 people staying in that same room in that same motel. Yeah. It puts a bit more pressure on the developers. Fine, I don't have an issue with that, to make sure they've got a solution in place. Squadron Energy, who have got a number of projects going forward, and you're right, Squadron is owned ultimately by Twiggy, or Twiggy's the main one responsible for it. Yep. You've got a process where they're looking for places for their employees to live. They approached council and said, we would like a large-ish parcel of land. We don't want to buy it. We want to build temporary accommodation there. And then at the end of that, we want to pick up that accommodation and go somewhere else with it. What can we do? So we've talked to them about some land in Keswick, and the decision that we made on Thursday night was we have recommended, council's recommended, that we go ahead and lease some land. It's 10 hectares of land that we will lease. Now, this is not, they're not buying it, they're not building long-term accommodation there. What we want to see them do, though, is leave legacy things in our community. So the idea here is we'll lease them 10 hectares of land. We'll charge them an annual fee for that lease that is a fair market value. But when you build your worker accommodation, when you put your underground infrastructure in, your water, your sewer, your power, your internet, all the things that are underground in the services you need, we want you to build that to a master plan that we will have for that parcel of land that will be the long-term use of that plan. So a normal subdivision. In the meantime, you might put some worker accommodation in there that's higher density, for example, that has more people living in those areas than we would have as a subdivision. And then at the end of that, you take away your temporary worker accommodation, and what we're left with is a subdivision that's got all the underground infrastructure in place that we can then build normal accommodation, and I'll sell that as normal blocks of land. But we've had a huge saving in terms of all that underground infrastructure, because that's expensive. Depending on a block of land and the size and all sorts of variables, you can be spending maybe even up to $100,000 per block for all those services that you're putting in, the road and all the other services that are required. So if this goes the way we want it to go, we'll pick up a lease for 10 years. I can't say the dollar value on that lease, but we'll pick up an annual payment for 10 years from Squadron, and we'll also have Squadron build various components of that subdivision ready for us to use later on down the track. So we're getting that for free, and we're getting an annual lease fee as well. Okay. For Squadron, they get to tick the box in terms of we're providing some accommodation for some of our workers. There might be 300 workers living in this particular area. That'd be more people than might normally live in that area. And you're not going to have families living in that area, for example. It's going to be specific worker accommodation, not dongers like you'd see on a mining site, certainly upmarket versions of that, but they'd be small, reasonably dense housing, and then they'll live there for 10 years, and then that'll be gone and normal housing will go in that place.
So a couple of quick questions, I suppose, from the point of view of what people may be thinking in regards to it. You're saying, so it's 10 hectares of land in the Keswick estate there. Whereabouts is that located? Is that close to where the current residential is, or is it separate to that?
If you go down Boundary Road, going in an easterly direction, on the left-hand side, you turn up Sheraton Road. If you look at that corner there, if you go northeast from that corner, so basically the corner of Boundary Road, Sheraton Road, going back up into Keswick. So there's no other residential land right near it at the moment, which is why we picked that parcel of land. There's certainly residential going up fairly quickly on the other side with South Lakes. There's certainly residential that will be built around that. And the parcel of land that the RSL Club's talking about is just back up behind that. So it's not right on the doorstep of other residential. There might be some people who live in that area-ish and might go, oh, I don't love the idea of that being across the road. But the way Squadron are doing these type of developments now, it just looks like a fairly dense housing development. It doesn't look like dongers. So it certainly looks a higher standard, a higher quality, because they're competing for employees as well. If they've got terrible accommodation and they're trying to attract employees along, someone says, well, I'm not going to go and live in that. I can go to this other project that's happening in Queensland or some other part of New South Wales or some other proponent, and their accommodation is of a higher standard. I'm going to go there, thanks very much. So it is something where we'll make sure we have controls in place to keep it at a high standard, but Squadron themselves want to make sure they do it to a high standard. So this is just another one of the ways that our community can win out of being a part of the renewable energy zone.
You mentioned there about the fact that the council will be involved, I suppose, in the planning process of this as well, from the point of view of how the roads will be set out. And so is council going to be dictating the terms of that, or is that going to be up to Squadron to decide, how their roads are set up in this area?
So we'll certainly be saying, here's our master plan for what this estate will look like long term. Now you need to work out a way to fit in. So we need a road here and we need pipes under the ground here and we need all that done for our long-term subdivision. You need to work out a way that you can put what you want in there at a higher density level, still fitting in with our overall structure. And the way they typically do that is, for example, we might have a 700 square metre block of land as a block of land in there. And that would be designed for a house and a backyard and a normal, say, 3-bedroom, maybe 4-bedroom house on that parcel of land. But in the short term, Squadron might say, great, we'll put 2 single units on that same parcel of land so it can still be left as the same structure. We can have a bit higher density because we can have a couple of single unit apartments there because most of their employees are just single living. And then later on we'll take those away and you can go and build your 3-bedroom house on there. So it's that type of concept where we build it long term for what we want long term. In the short term, Squadron can make it work for them. We're very specific, and we differ from some councils in this area. We're very specific that we want the employees from all of these projects living in our community. We think it's going to be better for our community in terms of our economy when they're living there. So there'll be a supermarket or an RSL club that might be nearby that particular parcel of land. So they'll go and spend their money there, or they might come into town to go to the movies, or they're part of our community. We want them as part of our community. And one of the interesting things, it's a bit of a myth where people say, oh, we want to make sure these projects, you employ locals for these projects. Well, you don't actually want that because these projects, we know that there's about 6,000 people that will be needed for these projects, say, over the next 7 years. The reality is we don't have 6,000 people hanging around in Dubbo now.
That's right,
without a job.
Jobs. Yeah, you're right.
So where are you going to get those people from? Well, the only way you'll get them as locals is to take them from other employers. Other employers are saying, don't keep taking my employees. I want to keep growing and expanding the business. Our economy is booming. I need more employees. Don't take all my employees. If you get people from outside of Dubbo, which hopefully a lot of these proponents do, they come from wherever, they move to Dubbo. They live in Dubbo for a number of years while these projects are being constructed, and they say, gee, I really like it here. I might stay in Dubbo. So we want to turn people from outside of Dubbo into locals. We don't want them to take locals. And if they do take locals, then those same employers that have just lost an employee then will try and attract someone else. So they'll bring someone else in from out of Dubbo to try and fill that job that was just taken away to one of these renewable projects. So we want those people in the community. We want them to come from outside of Dubbo, but we do want them living here. And again, I've talked to some other councils that have got renewable energy zones as part of their process, part of where they are, and they've been very adamant. We want people coming from outside. We want people living outside. We want them living on the site where that renewable energy project is. We want a mining camp out there. We don't want them in our town. Well, how are they going to inject money into your economy if they're living 20 kilometres outside your community?
Because traditionally that's what generally happens, isn't it? Like, you'll have the living quarters very close to where the mining area is, sort of thing, isn't it?
In a mine scenario, that's right.
Scenario, exactly right. There are other examples of this around the place, Matt, that we've got, or other towns or cities that have set up similar type of operations? And
not to that scale. Okay. There have been various proponents that have come in and they bought a motel, for example, but that affects tourism because that just took a motel out of the tourism market and had it dedicated for a renewable energy proponent. So you've got examples like that. You've got examples where they'll buy up some housing, some small amount of housing, for example, but I can't think of anywhere else where they've bought a large parcel of land to then use it short-term for them, long-term for the community. And again, it's not selling that land, it is leasing that land to them. So, and we are certainly talking very positively to these various renewable energy proponents to let them know we're open to ideas. Come along and suggest an idea, and if it's reasonable for our community as a good outcome, we're certainly happy to entertain that idea.
Okay. Now, speaking of some of the benefits that tend to sort of to roll in through this type of operations, there's been $950,000 that's been given by Squadron Energy here in regards to setting up a public art strategy or to assist with the presentation of our public art strategy here in town. $950,000. So was this signed off on during the week, the fact that this was an agreement that the council's now happy to jump into here with Squadron Energy on this?
Council's resolved it. It hasn't been signed off. Once council resolved, then goes through a process with the actual proponent themselves. But the first question I have for you is, did you know we had a public art strategy?
I had no idea we had a public art strategy. So this is exciting news to me, actually, to be honest.
And most people don't know we've got a public art strategy because we've done nothing with it.
Right, because we've now got $1 million for it, have we?
We've had $0 in the past, so we've had a strategy.
Well, that's probably why I haven't seen it, because I haven't seen anything from it.
That's exactly right. Okay. So, and we've got some strategies like this where we say, here are things the community wants. When we find some funding for it one day, and sometimes it might be from some grant funds, for example, oh, good, we can use that money for our public art strategy. So having some of these strategies, these policies, these documents in place means that they can be there when you need them. Now, with this particular one, this is a firming power station. Now, a Squadron, and it sounds like a bit of a show dedicated to Squadron. It's not meant to be, but
self-promotion there.
There's a couple of things that's happening with Squadron at the moment. They're pretty active, obviously.
Yeah. But this is great, though. Like, this is $1 million nearly, $950,000.
Well, that's right. Now, and it's a bit of a bonus money that I would say. As we know, we've talked about it before, when you've got a renewable energy project, we try and negotiate a voluntary planning agreement with the proponent to try and get some money for our community. They're voluntary. They don't have to do it. We say, please, sir, can we have another? They say, maybe yes, maybe no. And we have varying levels of success with different proponents.
Yep.
We found Squadron pretty good to deal with in terms of those. In fact, I'd go further than that. Squadron have been exceptional to deal with in terms of going through that VPA process. They've been very much in favour of delivering for the community. So thank you, Squadron, for your efforts around that. This is a little bit different. They're building a firming power station. Now, this is on some industrial land on Yarrandale Road, not council-owned land. It's owned by a private developer. They've secured that land, and the firming power station, because they'll be producing power, renewable power in our area, there are times of the day when there is excess renewable power. So middle of the day, lots of sunshine, maybe a bit of wind around, so there's excess power. What do you do with that? You might store it in a battery to be used after hours, or in this case, Squadron Energy is going to use that excess power to produce green hydrogen.
Okay.
That's fantastic. So you've now got a container storing some green hydrogen. What do you do with that? Well, you could use it to do some refueling of trucks that will eventually come along that will be hydrogen-based. Yep. Or, as an energy provider, being Squadron, you could say, well, we could use that green hydrogen, maybe do it as a shandy with some gas initially, but have a firming power station. So when we need some extra power, rather than turn on a battery, it's probably better to store it in a form of hydrogen and then turn it on when we need that. So they're doing that. So it's kind of a renewable project, but it's probably pushing it a bit to call it a renewable project in the truest sense of the word. It's just an industrial project. The same as we've got industrial land around Dubbo and someone builds an industrial shed to do some manufacturing or do something in an industrial basis. Yeah. But we spoke to Squadron when they were going through this planning process, and we said, well, you've been very good delivering for the community in voluntary planning agreements. This one's kind of a renewable project. Would you like to have some sort of planning agreement in place for some money to go to the community? And Squadron, to their credit, said, well, we don't really have to. This is really pushing the envelope here. Yep. But sure, we'll have a discussion about that. But what would you like us to spend it on? We said, well, you choose. You're going to give us some money that you don't need to give us. Here are our strategy documents. Here's our community strategic plan. Have a look through that and see what you like the idea of. They looked through that and they went, we think public art. We think the fact you've got a public art strategy is quite commendable. Why don't we contribute $950,000 towards your public art strategy? And of course, we talked about that. Now, there was some discussion at a committee meeting 2 weeks ago. Again, a great advantage of a committee meeting. we went through a committee meeting, and there was discussion at that committee meeting about possibly going to a 15-kilometre radius of that only, rather than the whole LGA. Now, remember, the public art strategy is a whole of LGA strategy.
Aren't we Dubbo Regional Council?
We are, and that was part of the debate. Hey, we should keep it around just the Firming Power Station, 15 Ks. Let's not do that. Let's do that. Maybe 35 kilometres. We should do that. Let's not do that. Fair bit of debate at the council meeting on Thursday night. In the end, the decision was made by council to put that $950,000 towards our public art strategy, LGA wide.
Yep.
And so that was the way going forward with that.
Which I like, because at the end of the day, we don't want to discriminate against any certain groups within our, region that we live in here, our regional council electorate area. Is there a potential then in regards to this? Are we looking then at seeing some more public art being put up around the place with this? Is this the whole idea? Is this obviously part of the plan?
That's exactly right. So we'll now go forward. Now it's been resolved by council and go back. We've got a letter of offer from Squadron Energy. We'll now go back and say thank you very much. We've resolved that we'll accept that letter of offer. We'll go and sign those documents up. And then our staff will have the job of saying, great, we've got our public art strategy. It's a 87-page document or whatever it is.
Right, okay.
And now we've got $950,000. Woohoo!
Let's start spending it. Yeah,
How do we spend that
to
give the best benefit for our community? I suggest that we'll probably see more public art in Dubbo than the rest of the LGA, just based on population. So I don't think, and maybe this is why councils went this way, we probably didn't need to restrict it to that 15K radius, because it's probably going to be spent more in Dubbo. But there was a discussion on Thursday night that some councils love the idea of spending some of this money in the villages and maybe getting some public art in villages, and that would be the Stuart Towns and the Mumbles and the Ballymores and the Mundries, all the villages, to have some sort of public art process there. Fantastic. The problem when you get a bit of bonus money like that sometimes is you get $1 million and you normally spend about $5 million of that in the first 5 sentences.
That's right.
We could do this and we could do that, we do that.
Everybody's got plenty of ideas.
That's right. We've got to narrow those down and get the best bang for our buck, and Squadron Energy want to see the best bang for their buck as well. So it's another good outcome from being part of the res, and also just having a positive mindset to have these discussions with the proponents, and also be prepared. Some will go, no, you're dreaming. And we go, okay, we thought we'd try it. We didn't get there. In this case, they said yes. And I think it'll be a good outcome for Squadron and certainly good for our LGA.
Sounds like a fabulous idea. Duke of Wellington Bridge. Geez, now talking about Wellington, we haven't spoken about this for a while. Now, of course, this is the bridge that got really damaged in the last lot of floods. There's no longer any road access to that bridge. $20 million, I think we talked about at one stage there to get this bridge fixed up and going again. Looks though there's been some discussion in regards to maybe opening this bridge up, but not for cars.
That's exactly right. And this is probably not so much the bridge damage, but you remember
the access to it.
Correct. The riverbank before there, where the Bell River comes in and meets the Macquarie River, flooding from 2022, chewed that away. You remember there's a report that was done many years ago that suggested fixing up that area. That didn't happen, so now we've got more damage. Obviously, doing something beforehand would have been cheaper, but the funding for this is about $23.8 million is our estimation to restore that road and fix up that riverbank there to stop further erosion there.
Has there been any sort of response from federal or state governments in regards to some money going that way?
No update at all at the moment. There's a number of applications they've got for disaster relief, so no feedback at all on that at the moment. But in the meantime, we did allocate $70,000 to do some temporary pedestrian access there, and that's now been completed. I haven't actually seen it yet, but I've been told by our staff that's now been completed.
So you can walk across it now. You can get access to walk to it and walk across it.
Exactly right. From both sides, obviously, we had to make some changes there and make sure it was safe was the number one issue there. Some people said, it'd be great if we could still walk across there, maybe even ride our bike across there. That sounds great, but we don't want to do that and then have some part fall away and have someone on there when that happens.
No, that's right.
Making sure it was safe, and I think we did that for a pretty reasonable sum, $70,000 for the damage that was done on either side or one side in particular. That was a reasonable sum, I think, to be able to get there and just have some pedestrian access there. So if you live in Wellington now, you've got access there. Next time I'm down in Wellington, we're going to go and have a look at that and just have a walk across there and just see how it all looks. But the good news is we've got pedestrian access
Absolutely.
there again.
At least it's being used again for something. Well, mate, it's time for Limerick of the Week. We've got through a fair bit there today. There's been a lot to get through. Obviously, the council meeting dominated a lot of that discussion today. What do you got for us this week?
There was a lot to look at, and so many different things that I thought that we could do it on. But apart from council meetings, always a highlight for me. There's lots of stuff that happens at a council meeting. It's always fascinating.
It was a big one too
democracy.
this week.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, but probably the highlight for me this week was the new resident night.
Oh, okay. Yes,
So my
nice.
limerick is about our new residents.
Here we go.
In Dubbo, the welcome is so bright. New neighbours felt pure delight. At the residents' eve, they found reasons to believe in a future so warm and so right.
Oh, very nice. Well done, mate. Well done. And welcome again to all our new residents out there. Well, folks, that wraps up again for Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Until next week, take care.
Straight from the Mayor's Mouth with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.